Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started here in a little bit and just give it a few more minutes for people to join in. I will be doing my dailies in this game while we wait for the start. I think I need these. We've got a list of news articles to talk about. We will run through that, and then if there are any questions on anything that was discussed, we can go into detail on that here shortly. Alright. So we start in 3 minutes. See if I can do my dailies in 3 minutes. I highly doubt it. I will be going back and I will be completing some of the games that I started earlier this year, like Forspoken and Hogwarts Legacy. Those are 2 games that I want to finish before the end of the year. So we're probably going to be playing through one or both of those games probably in a few weeks' time and try to get through those, just so I can say I've completed most of the games that I've collected throughout 2023.
Savor it for me.
Disappear among the sea of butterflies. Illusions of the past. I've lost my way.
Wow. Okay, that was that. That was only worth 100 points. Let's do a daily mission.
Busier places mean busier business.
I've been working on a couple of videos. I know I haven't uploaded a video in a while. I've been kind of delayed recently due to issues. I basically hurt my lower back. It was more than a week ago at this point, almost 2 weeks ago actually, and that's kind of why I haven't really put out a video in a while. But also because there's kind of not a whole lot in terms of the typical PC DIY hardware to talk about. One thing that did come out recently, which I do plan to put out a video on to some capacity, would be the AverMedia Live Gamer 2.1. So basically this capture card right here. So I will do a couple of videos on this. I do also mean to do a series of videos around OBS in general. Specifically OBS, I haven't really covered. Years ago, I did kind of like a how to, not really streaming focused, but I did a video on how to record gameplay for a PlayStation 3, because that required a workaround, especially if you did not want to use component cables and you wanted to use HDMI. So I did do a video years ago on how to do that. So I'll probably make a similar video in terms of how the video is structured. What am I supposed to look for? Oh, okay. All right. So the viewers are starting to come in. Once they're in, we will switch over to the news articles. But I want to try to get this stuff out of the way.
Busier business.
Anything I can do for you, kiddo?
Overhyped? What is this? All right. Okay. Yeah, but there's not a whole lot. There's a lot of weird stuff happening geopolitically recently. If anybody has been paying attention to that, I don't know if we're going to talk about that too much. But there is a lot of stuff that could potentially be destroyed if something catastrophic happened. So I don't know how much I'm going to go into that, if at all. But that is something that has held my attention recently. Let's put it that way. So a lot of the stuff that's been going on with the Middle East, with like Israel and all that stuff, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to unpack there. Now, there are potential... So the thing is, within Israel, Intel's fabrication and manufacturing is in Israel. So that is a key economic interest. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I can see kind of outside forces wanting to protect that. Because there's a lot of stuff riding on that. But I don't know. I don't know how much I want to go into that topic. That would be a very interesting thing to discuss and talk about. The whole geopolitical situation. But I don't know. It's kind of... It's not really the subject matter that this channel focuses on. So I don't know if we're going to go there. But hey, Gershon. How's it going? Welcome to the stream. So I'm going to wait for a few more of the regular viewers to join in, and then we'll probably get into the news articles. So until that time, I'm just going to take this opportunity to run through my dailies for this game. Send these guys out on their expeditions. A lot of the stuff that you do in this game makes me think of dailies from like a Final Fantasy MMO or something along those lines. Okay, I see Met's here now. Hey, Met. Okay, so we're done with this. So I managed to finish all of the dailies, and we're like, what, 3-4 minutes over the start time? So that didn't take that long. Let's go ahead and move the camera over here. So I got a couple of articles to discuss, and then we'll probably do viewer-related questions or that sort of thing. Alright, let me exit out of this game. Or at least silence this game. Okay. Okay. So, a couple things that I wanted to point out. Some articles that stuck out to me. One is there's layoffs in the game industry that are going to continue as companies become profit-focused. So, this is unfortunate, but I feel like there's a lot of weird stuff happening in the game industry, and this channel has definitely steered more toward the technology focus, so we tend to talk a lot about PC hardware on this channel, but how we evaluate the products that we look at, like for example a CPU or a GPU or a PC, the total platform, how that compares to a console, that sort of thing. We have to use video games to kind of evaluate, at least objectively evaluate the hardware. So the video game industry kind of not mimics, but it kind of mirrors the overall landscape for the PC hardware, because this is kind of one of the driving factors for raising the performance envelope to the next level when it comes to the next generation of hardware. So when you see these articles about layoffs, so the PC gaming industry is kind of weird because, or it's in a weird spot, because kind of this article points out that there's a correction in the market. Now, it depends on how you look at it. If you look at all the major games that released throughout this year, and there were a lot of them, this year has set the record in terms of the number of high-budget, overly hyped, or even under-hyped games. Like in the case of Baldur's Gate 3, for example, that game kind of came out of nowhere, even though it had been in early access for a long time. It came out. Took the gaming market by storm. It was very successful. It reviewed very well. The game ran relatively well on most systems, and it doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look like super outstanding next gen. But the game did well, and the game didn't have a super large team either. Compare and contrast that with a game like Starfield. That game was overhyped. It was overmarketed, especially by a lot of the media outlets like IGN and GameSpot and game trailers, etc. All of these different gaming media channels on YouTube and also on their own websites. The game was hyped up so much, very similar to Cyberpunk 2077. But then when the game finally came out, it kind of didn't really deliver in terms of the promise of what it was gonna do. Like it was kind of underwhelming. Like it was really hard to run well on a lot of systems, and then it only kind of got worse, right? Like the year kind of opened up with a game like Forspoken, which was extremely hard to run, and almost laughably so because the game doesn't really look that outstanding. Then you had games like Hogwarts, which was very VRAM heavy. That game created the whole 8 gigabytes is not enough VRAM debacle. And then we had Jedi Survivor, The Last of Us. We had all these games that used a ton of VRAM and were very CPU and GPU heavy at launch, and they are technically still that way even today. And then we, fast forward to the second half of this year, and then we got a lot of like UE5 games. Lumen and Nanite. We had Remnant 2. I think that was UE5. The Lords of the Fallen was UE5. Immortals of Avium. These games ran mostly like garbage on day one on your average PC, and whatever they advertised as the recommended specifications clearly underperformed at that spec. The most recent game that we could talk about is Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 is a very, very demanding game, but the visuals actually deliver in terms of how it actually looks. You spent like $490 to upgrade to AM5 with the 7800X 3D and the Asus B650E and Team Group 32. Yeah, I know you had that memory for a while. You were holding on to that memory for a while. You have any throttling issues in your Lenovo P15V Gen 3? The new BIOS? Well, I don't know if I'm on the latest BIOS, but I don't have any problems with mine. Yeah, the Lenovo P15V Gen 3 that's basically my daily driver. I use that every day, and I haven't had any problems with it. Yeah, I don't know if I'm on 1.14. I don't know. You had to move back. How do you downgrade the BIOS on that? Fans wouldn't turn on? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, what surprised me about my Lenovo laptop is the battery. I've had that laptop for almost a year. I think I got it in November of last year. And the battery is still brand new. Like when I checked my battery life with Hardware Monitor, the battery still says it's still right around 68 watt hours. I'm amazed. I've never had a laptop that after 1 year of ownership of that laptop, the battery is still, it still has the exact same capacity that it had on day one. That's the main reason why I made that follow-up video. Not only did somebody ask me in a comment on the video I did for the Lenovo laptop about a year ago, they asked for a follow-up video, so I did one, and I wanted to point out the battery, because I don't know, maybe I won the lottery on that battery. I have never had a laptop battery after 1 year still have the exact same capacity. The battery life didn't change. And I don't know if it's because the voltage runs really, really low on that laptop. It's like it's undervolted out of the factory. So the voltage pull on the battery is so low that it's the battery just kind of sips power. Oh, so you can downgrade the BIOS from the Vantage software? I thought you could only upgrade the BIOS. I've never tried to downgrade the BIOS or roll back. Yeah, the P15V is actually... See, when I got that laptop, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't know, but they do know a lot about ThinkPad keyboards, the P15V is the very last Lenovo ThinkPad to include the legendary keyboard in terms of the key travel. So the typing experience on the P15V is superior to all the newer ThinkPads that came out either around the same time that that laptop came out and all the ones that came out this year. Because that laptop, I think, that laptop's a 2022 laptop. Because it shipped with Rembrandt and the 68 or the 680M on the APU. So, and yeah, it's really good. I was looking at the 780M. The 780M is about, like, it's supposed to be a lot faster, but it's actually not. See, if we go 680M from Rembrandt 680M is about as fast as a GTX 780 or an Intel Arc A380. So the P15V laptop has a integrated GPU that is as fast as a Arc A380. Now keep in mind, this is a full discrete GPU that came out sometime last year. And then the GTX 780. Now, 780 is old. This is a GPU from 2013. This is a 10-year-old graphics card. But think about it. We're talking about a mobile integrated graphics that is equal to a big Kepler from 2013. That shows you how technology has progressed. And that's the 680M. The 680M is from last year. That isn't even like the latest and greatest. If you want to do latest and greatest, the 780M, which is in the Phoenix APU, this thing is as fast as a Radeon RX 570 or an R9 390 or an R9 290X or a GTX 970, or to put things in perspective, this integrated graphics, the Radeon 780M, is almost as fast as a GTX 780 Ti. It's like, the 780 Ti is about 6% faster than the 780M Radeon. Now, that's kind of, that's kind of interesting. Think about that. It's like within 3% of a GTX 970. So think about that. Because the GTX 970 used to be kind of like a typical target for a mobile in terms of performance tier for a discrete GPU in a mobile form factor. But now we have an integrated graphics card that's as fast as a GTX 970 or an RX 570. That's kind of crazy to think about. The Intel Arc A770 LE is a faster than... I wouldn't advertise that as an iGPU. I don't know. I would never go around saying that. That's kind of that makes it seem more negative than positive. if you try to claim the 770 is a iGPU. The buggy BIOS is 1.16. Okay. Okay, so you install it from an admin. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think mine is on the latest. I think it's on an older BIOS. It might not even be on 1.14. I don't know. Do you use the P15V with a docking station by chance? Because I use mine with a Thunderbolt docking station. Like I rarely use my ThinkPad disconnected. It's usually connected to a docking station most of the time, like during the day. GTX 1060 is an iGPU now. Yeah, and that's kind of like what this is. The 780M is almost as fast as a 1060. 1060 is like what, 12%? If we're talking the 6GB one, the 3GB one is probably like a 780 Ti. But that's kind of crazy to think about. But anyway, we're talking about the 680M, which is last year's model. So this is the one in that ThinkPad. And this one, see, so, okay, this is like that. Where's the 780M? The 780M is like a 970, or it's actually like a 570. So that it's like 20%, 22, 24% faster than the 680M. That's still a sizable leap, but if you were to run a 780M in a small thin and light side by side a 680M, the performance difference because of thermal constraints, the performance difference between a 680M and a 780M is only going to be like 10 to 15%. The only time you're going to ever see that full 22% delta is if you're in like one of those big like desktop replacements, like the P15V, for example, or like a gaming laptop with a huge, well, you know, like a thick, like an 8-pound bowling ball, or I should say an 8-pound laptop, a gaming laptop. Those type of laptops, you'll see like the 22% difference between a 780M and a 680M. Oh, okay, the same one that I have. You copied me all the way. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, man. So I've used ThinkPads for like a long time. Let's put it that way. So I've used many different docking stations from Lenovo over the years. And to be honest, at first, I was kind of skeptical of switching to the Thunderbolt dock because I didn't like the idea of having to use that USB-C form factor with the power cable, like with the magnet, and have to plug those two on the side. At first, I was like, I don't like this because I was so used to their latch mechanism that they had on their older docking stations. I think I have probably like 3 or 4 different generations of Lenovo docking stations. And then when I got the Thunderbolt dock, I was like, wait, there's no like slide mechanism. It just kind of like plugs in from a cable. I was like, I don't really like how this looks. But now it has actually grown on me, and I actually like the cable-based docking station more than the, you know, like the tray where you just sit it down on top of the thing and you slide in the connector on the side. I actually like the way the Thunderbolt dock works because it actually makes for a much cleaner desk space because you don't have this big thing, which is as big as a keyboard, sitting on your desk, wasting all that space if you're not going to use your laptop at the same time on the desk. So I actually kind of like the small form factor of that Thunderbolt dock. Your kid's playing Madden 2024 on it right now and it runs fine. Yeah. Yeah, because the thing is, you also get the professional, like the Nvidia RTX 2000. I'm forgetting what is it this one? No, not the A2000. It's the mobile one. I'm trying to remember what it is. It's like a 3050 Ti. It's like a 3050 Ti. This doesn't look right. No, this is not right. Anyway, what's 3050 Ti mobile? 3050 Ti mobile. This is basically... Okay, maybe this is what it is. This is not that fast, but... Yeah, actually, this is not that fast. This is actually worse than the 780M. Wait a minute. The discrete graphics in the P15V is worse than the integrated graphics in the current generation? The Dragon range? You wished you could get a longer Thunderbolt cable? So the reason why the Thunderbolt cable is not that long is because of how fast it is. The longer the cable, the harder it is to maintain high throughput and high amounts of bandwidth. So that's the reason why if you look at Thunderbolt cables in general, even for other devices, like I have this is a AverMedia Live Gamer Bolt that I featured in one of the videos with the P15V. This is a Thunderbolt 3 based external capture card that can do 4K 60 and HDR. This thing came with a really short, I think it's like 2 feet long, or like, yeah, something like that. It's like, I think it's less than 3 feet long. It might be a 3 foot long. I think it's a 2 foot long Thunderbolt cable. But the cable's really short because it has to have it has to be built to a certain spec in order to reduce signaling losses as the signal traverses that wire. That's the reason why the Thunderbolt cables are typically very short. Now, yeah, you can get a longer one, but they're not going to be cheap compared to your typical USB-C cable because they are built to sustain 40 gigabit speeds, especially if it's a Thunderbolt 3 or a Thunderbolt 4 cable. So that's the reason why they're short cables. It's because of signaling losses. But yeah, speaking of capture cards, I'm working on a video series for like streaming right now. I started work on it like earlier this week. I have one of these in from AverMedia. They sent me one of these. So this is the Live Gamer Ultra 2.1. So this is the world's first USB-C. It's 3.2 Gen 2x1. So it requires a 10 gigabit USB-C port on the back of the motherboard, or the laptop has to have a 10 gigabit USB-C. So it's USB-C, similar in appearance to the Thunderbolt one. I have tested it. I've been testing it versus the AverMedia Thunderbolt, the Live Gamer Bolt, and what I can tell you guys, my review of this, it's going to be mostly positive, but it's not going to be all positive because the latency on this USB-based capture card is not as good as the latency on the Thunderbolt card. I feel like, in my opinion, out of all the capture cards I've tested, the Live Gamer Bolt from AverMedia, this one is the best external capture card I have ever owned. Like this thing is amazing. It does have an active fan on the top of it, but it is very fast for an external capture card because it's Thunderbolt 3. It requires that 40 gigabit, basically USB 4, and the latency is so good. Like, you don't need to use the pass-through to a monitor. Like, you can literally just use OBS or Rec Central or XSplit or whatever, and you can use the full projector window screen, and you can literally play a game within OBS without using the pass-through with this Thunderbolt capture card, and the latency is so low that it's almost like I forget that I even have a capture card. I feel like it's almost like native in terms of the response time. Versus the USB-C. The USB-C, this is the newer one, mind you. Now, this one doesn't require Thunderbolt, but remember, because it's only built to 10 gigabit USB-C, it's not going to have as much bandwidth as that 40 gigabit. So what ends up happening is the latency goes up. So what's weird about this capture card, and now we're kind of way off track in terms of what I was going to talk about, and this is kind of a spoiler for the review, but basically, just to summarize it real quick, the video doesn't have any sort of synchronization issues, but the audio does, which is really weird. Every time, like I was testing, like if I pulled the trigger in like a first-person shooter game, there's like a half a second to almost like 3/4 of a second in terms of the audio delay. So it's like you pull the trigger and you see like the gunshot go off, but you don't hear anything until like the animation for the gunshot is already gone. And then you hear like the bullet fire. And I'm like, and it's very consistent with this capture card. So I don't know if that is a thing that can be fixed with a firmware update for this capture card, or if it's a software thing. What's weird is AverMedia just kind of like seeded these to the press, and there's literally no first-party software from AverMedia to test with this capture card. You literally have to use a third-party capture software, like OBS is what I've been testing it with, but that's because that's the only one that's available. Like, there's nothing else to test it with, which is really, really strange. So it feels like they kind of launched this product in a very weird state. It's like it was talked about at Computex back in June. Linus's group did a video about, I think, some other people. I don't know if Gamers Nexus did a video on it. I forgot when they were at the booth. I know Linus did one, and that video was pretty good, talking about it. And at the time, it looked like it was going to work with some sort of software, but there's no software to use with this thing. So it's just kind of weird. I can't update the firmware. There's no firmware to update. There's no drivers to update. What's cool about it though, you plug it in with the USB cable and it just works. Like it just automatically works. There's nothing to install. There's no software. There's no driver. It's plug and play. It's literally like plugging in a webcam and it just works. So I guess that's a positive, but you know, the latency with the audio is kind of off-putting, although thankfully there's a workaround for that. But anyway, we are way off track. But yeah, so that's cool that you have the P15V, because that's definitely probably one of the best laptops I've ever used from Lenovo. It has like the best typing experience. The Thunderbolt 4 docking station works really well if you're gonna drive multiple monitors. So really, really good laptop overall. It was also like the first laptop to feature like actual SODIMM DDR5. It's not soldered DDR5. What I don't like is how a lot of these new laptops feature soldered RAM. So you can't upgrade the memory. So if you're going to buy a new laptop, now you're kind of forced. If you choose 32 gigabytes, you're stuck on 32 gigabytes until you replace that laptop. So you might as well choose whatever the highest memory option is that they configure, but it's going to be very expensive. So yeah, that's the cool thing about the P15V is you can still upgrade the memory because it's actual DIMM slots or SODIMM versus like soldered RAM. So anyway. So yeah, so let's move on to the next article here. So Nvidia RTX 4090 exports. We talked about this last week. According to this news article, the narrative has changed. So it looks like the 4090 is going to be banned from sale in China after all. So when I last talked about this, we were talking about the big AI chips like the A800, the Grace Hopper, and the other variant of that Nvidia is selling for the hyperscalers and the AI market. And at the time, originally the story was that the 4090 was classified as one of the larger ADA dies, therefore it is banned from the Chinese market. Fast forward to a week ago, they were saying that the 4090 is exempt from that list on the grounds that it wasn't primarily built to be an AI chip. Now, with this latest article, it says several reports confirm that the US export restriction on the 4090 is set to be implemented on the scheduled date of November 17th. Now, this literally looks like someone made this from AI art. I can't tell if this is a real piece of art or if this is an AI generated image. It's interesting though. So in a new SEC filing, Nvidia confirmed that licensing restrictions have been implemented for their high-end data center products, which prohibit the shipment of these products. So it looks like they're gonna ban the 4090, or it's already been decided that the 4090 is banned. So what that means is that multiple AIBs are going to ship as many 4090s that they can to that region of the world before that law goes into effect. So the way I see this, if you were on the fence about 4090 or if you were wanting to get a 4090 around the holiday season, this is bad news, because this means that all the 4090s that would have normally been distributed in a normal distribution globally are now going to be stacked all into the Chinese market. So a whole bunch of them, more than normal, are going to be allocated to the Chinese market artificially during this short window of opportunity to get them in legally. And then once that's done, it's a done deal. And then everything should go back to normal for other places outside of China. So if you're wanting to get a 4090 around like a Black Friday sale or whatever, I've got news for you based off of this. There's going to be no special Black Friday deals for the 4090. And frankly, there shouldn't be any, because the part keeps selling out. The demand is so high. no one's going to go out of their way to offer a sale on the 4090 if it's already selling well above MSRP. That doesn't make any sense from a revenue versus profit ratio standpoint. Anybody who understands basic economics and business will understand, yeah, naturally, you're not going to put any of these things on sale. In fact, Best Buy has been trying their best to hide the Founders Edition 4090 from the search results. If you try to search for the 4090 Founders Edition on BestBuy.com in the US, you're going to have a hard time finding it unless you already bookmarked the listing, because they're trying to hide it because they're not going to have any for sale for a very long time, probably until next year. So the only options that remain would be AIB cards, local micro centers, and then of course Newegg would be the best bet in terms of trying to get one of these before they dry up and before the price hikes and the scalpers start coming in and trying to capitalize on what's going to happen here in the next few weeks. So it's only going to affect the RTX 4090. This is not going to affect any of the other Nvidia GPUs. And that's because the 4090 is the only consumer GPU today that uses the full Ada die. Every other chip that Nvidia makes with an RTX GeForce brand is a much lower end, smaller die, and therefore the US government thinks that those chips are garbage and can't be used to make China develop a Brainiac supercomputer that can destroy Earth just like Brainiac did to Krypton. That kind of stuff. That's kind of way out there, conspiracy theory sort of talking, but that's kind of one of the sort of general ideas behind why the 4090 is restricted and why the others are not. What's really weird is how the 4090 is impacted, but none of the AMD cards are, which is kind of hilarious because I don't know. I guess it's because the software ecosystem for AMD basically requiring Linux at this point is not seen as a threat. I don't really know what the deal is with that, but I don't know. It's like 4090 is going to be hard to get for the next few months, but everything else should be business as usual. So there's that. Okay, and then the other thing worth talking about here is, let me look at what I wrote in my agenda for the stream. Oh, MI300. MI300 could be company's fastest product to rake 1 billion. Okay, so this next one's going to be an AMD article. So the AMD Instinct MI300X could be the company's fastest product. So there's a lot of interesting things happening right now. So I have talked recently with a lot of business owners that provide the infrastructure for hyperscalers and cloud providers and backup storage companies, disaster recovery, etc., those kind of things. And they've been telling me the general narrative when it comes to talking about AI is that the world kind of changed overnight last November, about a year ago. And it all started when ChatGPT became publicly available. That's what started this what's the word? This breakthrough, this renaissance into the AI era. It was when ChatGPT went live last November. So it's been about a year now, because we're in November 2023. And Nvidia became so popular when people figured out, oh, ChatGPT is like the latest and greatest thing since sliced bread. We got to make our own. Why do we need to license this from OpenAI? I don't want to have anything to do with OpenAI. Let's make our own. A lot of people did this. Microsoft started working on this. Google had already been working on this. Meta, you name it, Apple, all of them all the big cloud boys, AWS, Azure, Apple's cloud, Google cloud, Meta, all of them started doing their own thing. And we recently saw when Mark Zuckerberg got on the stage of the Meta Quest 3 announcement and all that stuff. They showed all the AI. They showed Snoop Dogg and his AI, the AI variant of Snoop Dogg and all those other actors and actresses and whatever. They showed all that off. That was kind of what they were working on since November of last year. And what has become the bottleneck, the true bottleneck that nobody talks about, and maybe here's where you have to open up Paint. Maybe here's where we have to open up Paint. Here, let's go to Paint. The true bottleneck. So, okay, let's, maybe we should, I don't know if we need to do a timeline. Let's just say like November 2023, Chat GPT, what was it, like 3.0? I think it was 3.0, or maybe it was 4.0. I don't know. I don't remember which version it was. Whatever. Chat GPT becomes publicly, or becomes public. Like, people can actually start using it. Like, they unleash it upon the world so that people could actually start interacting with it. People that are outside of OpenAI's internal testing team. You know, so it kind of goes into like a public beta. This spikes interest in, we'll call it generative AI. Because now everyone's talking about Gen AI. What's Gen AI? Gen AI is generative AI. It is AI that creates something based off of some kind of input. And the way it's able to create that thing is based off of the repetition from training the model on a lot of data sets. And this is a very manual process in the beginning. And then later on you can automate it once you have larger, more useful data sets. So we're not going to talk all about how machine learning AI works. I think that's something for a completely separate video. But basically, this spikes interest in generative AI. This then starts... It basically, this then drives AI startups to be created, I guess. Because now you've got all these different startups, like there's all these different companies. And what do? They go to these data center companies or companies that have the facility or the capability to host these AI training models, these large language models, these LLMs on servers, on-prem, but because these startups don't actually have all the infrastructure, you know, like think about it like this. If I wanted to start an AI company, I need to have the GPUs or the AI ASICs, you know, like Grace Hopper or whatever, or the AMD MI300. I have to have those. Then I have to have the server to put those things in. So I got to buy a server, or I got to build one from, like, you know, Sun Micro, or maybe I'll build a Threadripper. You could build a Threadripper for AI. You just put Threadripper there, plug in a bunch of your RTX 4090s, and you're good to go. You know, that's how to do it on the cheap. Unfortunately, RTX 4090 does not have enough VRAM for this kind of large language model. You typically need, for something like ChatGPT, you need more than 33 gigabytes or so in terms of VRAM. And that's the reason why the Ada, basically the 4090 Ti card, that's like $6,000, almost $7,000. That's why that thing is so expensive, because it has 48 gigabytes of VRAM. It has enough VRAM to run ChatGPT independently on its own. So You need something like that, and then you need some kind of server or some kind of high-end workstation like a Threadripper or something that can host that and then run the hypervisor and run all the kind of hooks that hook into that API, etc., whatever, to interact with it remotely, right? Then you need the network. You have to have it connected to the network, and you have to provide the bandwidth for all the users that want to interact with ChatGPT or whatever your language model or whatever the thing is that you're creating using that's going to do generative AI, image generation or whatever. You're going to need to have that on a server that has access to an internet circuit that the public then can use to connect to. So you're going to need an IP address, you might need a firewall or some kind of form of security. So you can imagine how this starts trying to do like an AI startup, balloons into requiring so many different technologies outside of just the one server that's going to house everything. You need like a network switch or maybe a router. Now you're talking about public IP space because you need to get that thing to be reachable to people to actually use it. So now you're starting to get into the realm of telecommunications and IT networking and all this other stuff. So you can imagine how this is something that a lot of people who want to do an AI startup, they don't have the knowledge on how to do a lot of these things. They might know how to make an AI model, they might know how to build a server, but do they know how to do all the other things? Do they know how to get the global IP? Do they know how to get the website or whatever they're going to use for probably a website? Like they're going to have to build a website. Maybe they can do that. But how are they going to host the thing? How is people going to access this thing? So this has created a kind of a lucrative opportunity for companies that offer the rack space to host these AI models in their cloud. So it could be something big like AWS. It could be something small like some, a startup company that just wants to build a data center, and they believe that if they build a data center and supply all the cages for the colos and all this other stuff, if they do that, then maybe people who do their AI startup will want to come there and rent out the rack space. And this is actually something that's happening all over the place right now, interestingly enough. So the main limiting factor for AI right now is power. Power, and when I say power, I'm talking power in kilowatts. I'm not talking about like Palpatine unlimited power. I'm talking about electricity. We're literally talking about electricity. The limiting factor for AI is the electrical grid. It is actually the power grid is the limiting factor. Not compute, not the shortages from Nvidia or TSMC. There are shortages with procuring the chips to do the whole AI thing, but if you can look beyond the lead times for ordering the hardware, the real limiting factor is actually the electrical power grid. And this is a global problem right now. It's definitely a problem in the United States. It's definitely a problem in North America in general. I'm not too sure about South America, but I know for a fact that in the U.S. alone, I think Canada's kind of in the same boat, and Mexico's probably in the same boat as well. There's not enough electricity to go around for the number of people, the number of organizations that want to do this generative AI on their own. So what's probably going to happen is, unless there's some kind of federal spending or whatever to enhance the electrical grid or do something along those lines, the AI startups are not going to be able to scale to the same, to a very high level, let's say, or like they're not going to get a lot of volume because there's not a lot of power, and they're going to be constrained by the utility fees. Because, like I said earlier, these companies, AI startups, lack experience in everything outside of Gen AI. So that includes, so that's something like networking, telecom, on-demand circuit, basically like ISP peering, all these kind of things, the things that no one really talks about ever. These are the things that AI startups typically don't have expertise in. So they're more inclined to rent out, let's just say, therefore, they usually rent rack space from companies that provide the data center space and power. I keep saying that in caps because that is a limiting factor. So therefore, they usually rent rack space from companies that provide the data center space and power. And these companies can also provide, not only do they provide the kilowatts, and they bill them on a monthly, usage fee in terms of how much electricity you're using and how much space you're using. It's typically going to be something like kilowatts per square footage or kilowatts per hour per square footage or whatever. Like, it's how much space you're using to run your little AI server, and then how much electricity that server is consuming, or all of your devices are consuming. If you provide your own router, your own firewall, your network switch, your whatever, if we're talking InfiniBand from Nvidia / Mellanox, or if we're talking old school Ethernet from essentially everybody else. This is something that we talked about in a previous live stream a few months ago when we first talked about AI, but now AI is another topic that keeps coming up because people are always asking me like, well, should I go to 4090? Should I go to 4090? Well, I'm giving you guys background onto why the 4090 is going to be near to impossible to purchase for the next few months, depending on where you are in the world. So it all links back to AI, but the thing that's kind of like the floodgate that's holding back AI right now, it's actually not the chips. It's not the fact that if somebody buys an Nvidia Grace Hopper today, they have to wait like about a year to get it. That's not the floodgate. The floodgate that's holding everything back, it's the utility company. It's the power grid. Like, there's literally not enough power. So what ends up happening is companies that provide the space, the data center space, because they can't allocate more power. Like, for example, if I need hypothetically, if I need 120 megawatts for my AI startup, the rack space company, might not be able to deliver. They might not be able to provide that much power at the typical rate that they've traditionally charged for that much power and that much amount of space of square footage. Let's say you only need like 400 square feet or 300 square feet or some, whatever, some little box in the colo to fit all your servers that are going to run all your AI stuff. Like if you need, like, let's say you need like 100 megawatts or whatever, some huge number. Well, this is probably way too big. Let's use a smaller example. Let's say you only need like 50 megawatts. 50 megawatts of power. Like in the past, they would charge, whatever the going fee was, the competitive rate with comparing to other providers. But now they're charging, like 50% more or 60, 70% more on utility fees because there's not enough, there's not more power to use, therefore they're going to raise the rates. So that could have a negative effect on electric costs in regions where power is very limited right now. At the same time, there's demand for AI in the free market space with all these AI startups and all these generative AI things that not just startups are doing. I've only talked about startups. I haven't even mentioned, we mentioned them earlier, but remember the hyperscalers like AWS and Azure and Meta. These guys already have their AI models, and they already have all the hardware they need, or at least most of it, to do all the AI stuff that they want to do. So they're literally just sitting there waiting for more rack and stack. So they're always going to be power limited. And that's going to drive the cost of electricity up. And in the areas where they operate, because they're pulling in more electricity, the overall grid, it's going to divert more to them. So how do you keep it balanced? Well, you raise all the prices for all the neighboring areas, including residential. So this could become a huge problem. Basically, the AI boom could potentially cause the average electric bill to go up due to this. And no one's talking about it. And it is a very alarming problem that I've never once seen any news article online or elsewhere talking about this, talking about how AI... I remember when crypto was popular, back when Ethereum mining was popular, like about 2 years ago, before it fell off last year, there was talk about the electric grid being strained because of cryptocurrency mining. Well, nobody's really saying that, or if they have said it, it hasn't really been echoed enough times about the AI market, because the AI market is kind of here to stay until that market matures and the major forces behind AI in terms of like which companies have the actual generative AI apps, the killer apps that people actually want to use, until that happens, this is going to be a problem, a perpetual problem that I don't really see being solved anytime soon, other than raising people's electricity bills across the board. So it's unfortunate. It's another annoying thing to have to think about in a time where we got all these geopolitical things. We just talked about the whole China ban with the GPUs and how that's going to have negative effects elsewhere outside of that region. And then, of course, the stuff like with Israel. So, it's kind of a mixed bag all over the place, depending on how you look at it. All right, well, I talked about this thing for a while and nobody said anything. I'm surprised nobody had any comments on that. So either I put everybody to sleep, or I'm either offline and I've been talking to myself, or I don't know what happened here. No, I'm still live. We have people watching. I just don't know if anybody was paying attention, because this subject might be completely like outside the realm of what people who watch my content typically pay attention to. And that's totally fine. All right, so let's go back to the... So yeah, just to kind of sum up this article about the MI Instinct. So I don't even know how I got way off on that tangent about AI, but the MI Instinct MI300X could become AMD's fastest product to rake in $1 billion in sales revenue. I could totally see that happening, mainly because Nvidia right now is having a lot of issues with addressing the demand for AI chips. So AMD is kind of in a unique spot to be that fast second, so to speak, to use business terminology. So the Instinct MI300X, they're claiming leadership generative AI accelerator. And the thing is, when you literally only have like two choices, it's either this or the Nvidia one, and the Nvidia one is super expensive, and if you buy one today, you can't get one until a year from now. you're definitely going to consider this, because it's like, who wants to wait around for a year? You're not going to be making any money with your startup for a year, unless you keep going around talking to people, trying to get investor capital, I guess. But, other than that, you're just going to be a sitting duck. So it is worth looking at this. But what it boils down to is kind of the ease of use in terms of the software stack. Like, if I were to go AMD for my AI needs, like how much more in terms of the software development efforts is that going to cost? It comes down to an opportunity cost. It's like, yeah, the AMD one is cheaper and it might have a better lead time, but it's like, am I going to have to spend, 2x more money on programmers to build everything custom to work with the AMD chip versus use a bunch of libraries that already exist from Nvidia and just iterate off of that? Because that's kind of the problem with AMD right now, is the software infrastructure is not there. AMD has always had great hardware in both CPU and GPU. The problem has always been on the software ecosystem. And I think that's kind of where the big gamble is, because it's like, would I consider MI300 for my AI startup company, my hypothetical AI startup company? Yeah, I totally would. But what's the opportunity cost in terms of, like, how much more effort on the software side is going to be required to get the exact same result using this, or maybe even a better result, who knows, in terms of cost differences and that sort of thing. But anyway, interesting times we live in, I'll just say that, because there's just so much stuff. It's like every time I look at these news feeds, there's always some kind of new thing about AI. Like on the chip, talking about the chip side, and then talking about like the actual use case. So okay, well, Nvidia, we already talked about that. So they're rushing the 4090 orders to China. What else did I have on my list here? Oh, the AMD mobile processor lineup was leaked. I think that was in here. Let's see. Okay, maybe it was in here. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so this next article, AMD mobile processor lineup in 2025 sees fire range, strict halo, and a significant AI performance increase. So all this stuff about AI, everybody's been talking about integrating AI into the processor. What I want to know is, or what I want to see some tangible benefits to doing that. Because what is this going to do that you couldn't do with Microsoft Windows using some kind of caching system for like frequently used applications? Like, I don't really know where the benefit is for this thing, for the AI on the actual die. Unless it's gonna interface with Microsoft's Copilot or some kind of AI assistant built into Windows 11 or whatever they end up doing. I don't really see the point. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that I'm skeptical, or it hasn't really shown kind of a significant difference in terms of having an AI assisted ASIC integrated into the APU versus not having one. So it's kind of like the way I'm treating this like I've always treated Intel's E-cores in their Alder Lake and their Raptor Lake processors. Like, the E-cores, from what I can tell, they don't really seem like they do a whole lot relative to the P-cores and relative to the chips that don't have the E-cores enabled. So, what is the AI chip going to do in terms of benefit there? But if we look at this, so the mobile roadmap shows here for 2024 Dragon Range on mobile is going to have up to 16 cores plus 3D V-cache on a Zen 4 die. Now keep in mind, this is mobile, this is not desktop. I know a lot of people that watch my content, they're all about desktop PC builds and that sort of thing. So this is all mobile. Strix Point, which is Zen 5, that's coming out in the second half of next year. That makes sense because that's typically how laptops work. Laptop companies will announce their refreshes around the late winter, early spring, and then you'll be able to buy the actual models in the second half of the year. So that this kind of thing with Strix Point is kind of in line with that. And then we have more Rembrandt, Barcelo. I guess they're going to continue selling the Zen 3 and Zen 3 Plus. I'm not sure why. I don't know if that's because of a supply chain issue, because TSMC only has a certain number of capacity per node. So if you want to hit higher volume of products in the market, you would offset your manufacturing on different nodes. That way you can do that. Because I think one of the problems for AMD is the same problem that Nvidia runs into. It's all about the availability. Because AMD and Nvidia are dependent on TSMC to manufacture their chips, they only have a fixed number of chips that they can order, or they can have TSMC build. So if you can spread out your product portfolio across different nodes that TSMC provides, then you can get more volume, more products, and then you can, in theory, compete more favorably against your competition. So in this case, if AMD wants to take more mobile market share from Intel, they probably need to keep manufacturing on these other nodes. So they need Zen 4 and they need Zen 3 and Zen 3 Plus, as shown here, to exist to offer more products at different price points. I think that's kind of the way I see it. Maybe like accessibility for someone that has... Lou Gehrig's? What was that in regards to? Oh, was that in... the AI. AI on the die. Yeah. Maybe. The thing is with the AI that you still have to interact with it. I'm assuming you were referring to the AI on the die. So they're going to continue with, they're going to do Zen 5 on mobile next year, but they're also going to continue, Zen 3 Plus and Zen 3. So that means that these older products are going to continue to exist. I don't know how I feel about the Zen 3 with Vega, Barcelo still existing in 2024. That to me is kind of weird. But I mean, I guess if they're going to do, even Mendocino is still around and that's Zen 2 based. What's weird is Barcelo Zen 3 with Vega, Mendocino Zen 2 with RDNA 2. That is, and that's a newer node, so I don't know. That's a low power thing though. DLSS coming to COD, Modern Warfare 3, Rogue City, some other stuff. There was another game recently. I think it was City Skylines. I don't think Tech Power Up covered that game. What is this? BOXX introduces new APEXX T4 Pro, Ryzen Threadripper Pro 7000 WX series workstation. So this is interesting. So far, oh wow, they even offer it in this form factor. They offer the chassis with the mountable rails, so you can put it in an actual rack. That's cool. And here are the specs. Yeah. I wonder, is my stream set up for... Oh, I'm on low latency. So I feel like there's a lot of delay when people's messages come in. Yeah, so this workstation, it looks like it's only going to offer Threadripper Pro, which means this is going to be disqualified for most enthusiasts that are looking at Threadripper, because Threadripper Pro is very, very expensive. Like, we're talking, like $3,000 plus for these CPUs. So yeah. And it comes with a 1200 watt power supply and 8 DIMM slots for memory, up to 1 terabyte of memory, and a lot of X16 slots. And one is an X16 X8 electrically. But this is some pretty high end stuff. I'm actually still really interested in Threadripper. I know a lot of people that follow me are not that interested in Threadripper. They're more interested in Zen 5 coming next year, or whatever Intel's going to do next year. And I know Intel's got a lot of things planned for next year. But I'm still somebody who is very interested in Threadripper. Not so much Threadripper Pro, but definitely the standard Threadripper, because the 24 core, I'm really interested in that 24 core 48 thread Threadripper, on a TRX 50 motherboard. I'm really interested in that. I'm not saying I'm going to get one, because it's still going to be really expensive. I imagine the motherboard itself is going to be really expensive. But we'll see. I don't know. It depends on how it does, because the thing is, right now, what I would replace for the Threadripper is the Intel i9. So if I'm going to replace one of my PCs with, well, actually, I don't know. I don't know if I have to replace the Intel computer. I could always just kind of rebuild my old Threadripper and just change that into the new Threadripper. So I could probably do that. Now, granted, most of the stuff in there will end up being new anyway, because this would require DDR5. It will require a new motherboard, probably a new cooler. I don't know if my Threadripper cooler that I have right now, which is an air cooler, would work with this thing. So I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns with the new upcoming Threadripper, but it's going to be the fastest consumer desktop platform available for a pretty long time when it does come out. I don't expect anything to be able to dethrone Threadripper out of all the stuff that's coming next year. Nothing's going to be able to match Threadripper in terms of the multi-thread performance. Now, they'll probably be faster. I'm pretty sure they'll be faster single-thread CPUs coming next year, but the multi-thread, though. And if you're anybody who's even remotely interested in Threadripper, then you're someone who's going to be you're going to be looking at it for content creation or some sort of heavy, actual work on a processor, not just gaming. Like, Threadripper and gaming is kind of pointless. I mean, you can do that, but it's kind of not what it was designed for. So what is this? AMD introduces Zen 5 and Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 3 mobile with Zen 4C. Oh, Ryzen. Okay, for some reason I was thinking of 5000 series. It's mainly because Ryzen 3. I haven't heard of a Ryzen 3 in a long time. Apparently, only the Ryzen 7, in terms of the U series, includes the 780M. The Zen 4C. It's like compact. The C doesn't actually stand for compact, but I can see why a lot of people would assume that's what it stands for. It actually stands for cloud. It's the processor that's meant to go in the cloud server, the APEXX server, in this case the Bergamo 128 core, 256 thread for the hyperscaler. But that's a single socket only processor. So it's the use case of it's kind of limited in terms of who would actually use that, but it kind of depends. So we've got Ryzen processors with both Zen 4, Zen 4C versus Intel with both P and E cores. All cores use the same instruction set. Okay, so what they're showing here is This is basically a slide to show that Intel's advertising of their cores is kind of misleading, at least when you read the headline for the Intel product listing. And I get why they're saying that, because Intel, if you go and look at an Intel product listing for like a 14900K or a 13900K, it will say, like in the case of the i9, it will say 24 core processor. So it markets it as a 24 core processor. But the reality is, it's like, is it really a 24 core processor? Technically, it's a 24 core processor, but not all of the cores are the same. So it's almost like false advertising, or it's almost like they have to have an asterisk next to that 24 number because it's only 8 performance cores. Out of those 24 cores, only 8 of them are the big cores. The remaining 16 are the small E cores. And the P cores support pretty much all of your standard instruction sets like AVX, AVX2, etc. I don't know about AVX 512. I mean, it used to, but they took that away. But the E cores can't do that. The E cores can't do, as far as I know, you can't do AVX2. And there's some other stuff that the E cores can't do. They also don't run at the same frequency. They run at a lower frequency, and they boost only up to like 4.3 gigahertz. So their base clock is different, their boost clock is different. And on top of that, none of the E cores feature simultaneous multi-threading. So this SMT, they don't have hyper-threading. So like 16 E cores equals 16 threads. 16 core, 16 thread. But the 8 P cores, 8 cores, 16 threads. Because each P core is like an AMD core. It can do 2 tasks. It can be scheduled to complete 2 tasks simultaneously. Hence simultaneous multi-threading. So it's, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of misleading. Because I feel like I would have never purchased the 13900K when I did last year if Threadripper launched last year. The only reason why I bought the 13900K was because they marketed it as a 24 core processor, and I thought, oh, it's a 24 core. I mean, but it's not really. I mean, it's kind of 24 core, but you know, it's like it's almost kind of like false advertising on Intel's part. They usually 24 cores where 16 can't do work. They usually spam E cores relative to the number of threads on the P cores. Yeah, I can see how they did that. Yeah. Well, no, I don't really see that because Intel did like 8 or 6 plus 8, right? They did 6 plus 8, and then they did hold on, where's my, I forgot to exit out of the game. All right, let's go back in Paint. All right, so all this stuff that I wrote, like, I guess we can delete this, but that was kind of the previous thing. I mean, if anybody wants to talk about that, I guess, let's put this, like, over here or something. Let's look at this 12600K. What is this? This is 6 plus, this is a 6 plus 4. This is 6P plus 4E. And that is 16T. Then we had 12700K. That is 8P plus 4E. So that's going to be 16 plus 4. So that's 20T. Then you had the flagship 12900K. That was 8P plus 8E. So that was 16 plus 8, 24T. So it's didn't really follow the model, right? Because at least Alder Lake didn't follow the model. So you had Alder Lake, then you had Raptor Lake, and this one had 6P plus 8E. So you had 12 plus 8, so you had 20T. Then you had 13700K, which was 8P plus 8E. So 16 plus 8, so you had 24T. So you can see how Intel did up the total thread count across the board when they went from Alder Lake to Raptor Lake. Because the flagship is the one that stood out to me. Because this one had such an enormous number. It had such an enormous number of E-cores. You know, when I saw 16 E-cores, I was like, wait a minute, 16? Like, there's 16 of those little things? Like, okay, now they got my attention. Because previously, for those that don't know, the system that I ran before I built this 16 E-core machine was Threadripper 2950X. This is a 16-core 32 thread. So this is 16-core 32 thread. So I was already on a 32 thread machine from AMD from 2018, I think. It's pretty old. It was pretty old. Actually, yeah, I think I built this machine at the end of 2018 or the beginning of 2019. So basically what I'm saying is I already had a 32 thread computer from as far back as 2018. Because the original Threadripper, the 1950X, was the first 16-core 32 thread. That was from like second half of 2017. It came out the first year as like Ryzen. It was like in the second half of that year. So like the first generation Threadripper, which was the 1950X, launched around the same time as Coffee Lake i7 8700K. But this one came out like, this one launched around the time of the first i9 9900K, I think. Yeah, 2018, I think. I think so. Because what did Intel launch in 2019? Intel launched absolutely nothing that year. Yeah, it was a big fat 0 for them. That was weird. That was probably the height of their issues with the nodes. Because then they eventually got Comet Lake out at some point. Because 10th gen was 2020. First half 2020. Then Zen 3 came out in second half 2020. And it was way faster. Then Intel launched Rocket Lake in first half 2021. That thing was a disaster. That was a dumpster fire. And then they quickly launched Alder Lake 12th gen in the second half of 2021. Like, it was so bad, Intel launched 2 CPU generations in the same year. That's how bad Rocket Lake was. So, but yeah, I had this thing since like, I think late 2018, I think, somewhere around there, or early 2019. Anyway, the point is, I had this 32 thread machine already for a number of years. So when I saw this magical 32 threads on an Intel CPU, I was like, wait a minute. Intel has a 32 thread machine at last? Finally, for the first time ever, Intel has 32 threads. I couldn't help myself. because AMD was like, I was thinking the whole time, I was like, man, where is the upgrade for the Threadripper? Where's the Threadripper 5000? They never launched it. So I was kind of like, well, I want a 32 thread machine. And granted, I already had this, the 7950X, but the 7950X replaced a different machine. The machine that I'm using right now is the 7950X. This machine was the replacement for my old gaming PC, which was Ryzen 7 5800X. This was 8 core, 16 thread. So these were the two computers that I was using at the time. This was kind of the gaming slash streaming PC, basically the PC that I'm using right now. And this was kind of the workhorse, workstation, whatever you want to call it, the high thread count thing that didn't play games, but had all the hard drives, had all the PCIe connectivity, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I've, in the past, kind of the reason why I would have to is for like dual PC streaming. But nowadays, especially with a 16 core, 32 thread, you don't actually need a second PC. You don't need a dual PC stream system anymore. But yeah, I was just too curious. Like with 13900K, I was really curious to see what it's like to run a 32 thread Intel. Because you guys got to remember, like the last time I had Intel was like a long time back. So yeah. But anyway, I wanted to see what it's like to have a 32 thread Intel, so I got that, and that's why I have that. But if Threadripper comes out this month, I will strongly consider, depending on a couple things, price being one of them, because if the Threadripper is just way too expensive, then I'm not going to upgrade to it if it's just way too expensive. But yeah, I think next year is going to be a lot more interesting. For those that are thinking of upgrading, unless you're on like an ancient DDR3 computer, like, you know, like a Haswell or an FX8350 or whatever, like if you're on something super old like that, then yeah, it's probably questionable in terms of like, should you wait or just upgrade? New Threadripper looks like unobtainium. Well, there's two, right? There's Threadripper and there's Threadripper Pro. Threadripper Pro is unobtainium. I'll agree with you there. Threadripper itself, the regular Threadripper, I don't think it's unobtainium. It's just going to depend on the price points for the motherboards, as well as the feature set, and also kind of like DDR5, like RDIMM DDR5. Because if Threadripper doesn't support UDIMM at all, that could also be a potential deal breaker in my mind. Because in my mind, I don't see why we can't run UDIMM unregistered DDR5 instead of registered DDR5. Because the old school Threadripper, you know, like the old 2950X that I had, this thing ran fine on, you know, UDIMM DDR4. I ran 128 gigabytes of RAM with that Threadripper for years, and it worked totally fine. So, you know, I was running originally, I think like day one, I had this thing paired up with, I think it was like 64 gigabyte, 3200 megahertz DDR4. And then I upped it all the way up to 128 gigabyte at 2933 megahertz DDR4, which is not terrible, but considering what you're doing with this PC, it's not playing any games, it's only being used as a workstation. I used it for virtualization. I ran VMs and stuff off of it to emulate things like routers and that kind of stuff, and like set up like a route reflector and Anycast gateway. Like those are the sort of things that I would do with the Threadripper. So for that, you know, who cares what the RAM speed is? I could just be running like JDEC 2666 if I wanted. It didn't really matter. I just pushed it all the way to 2933 and it was stable all the whole time. So, you know, yeah, that's basically how I used mine. And I didn't need ECC memory, and it supported ECC, but I didn't need it. So it would be nice to know if the new Threadripper will support typical non-ECC DDR5. Because if I have to buy super expensive DDR5 in addition to the expensive CPU and the expensive motherboard, then I might agree with you, Nero. At that point, then I might consider it unobtainium. Which is unfortunate because Threadripper is actually a true high-end desktop. This stuff right here, this and this is not, in my mind, these are not high-end desktops. These are typical mainstream, you know, peasant class hardware, if you want to call it that. You know, like Threadripper is the real deal. Like that's the real high-end desktop. This stuff, nah, this is just some regular whatever, you know, like as regular mainstream stuff. So, yeah. So that's my opinion on it, though. Like, you guys can consider the 7950X3D and the Intel equivalent as high-end if you want, although nobody in the professional world will agree with you, but that's just how it is. If they have a situation where the partners price the motherboards too high again, then it will be... Well, the motherboards are already going to be high. It depends on what you mean. Threadripper motherboards, I don't expect any Threadripper motherboard to be under $600. Like, I'm hoping there'll be some Threadripper motherboard from, like, ASRock that's, like, $600, $700. Like, to me, that's acceptable. Anything higher than that is still doable, but like the maximum that I would do, like here's my thing, like Threadripper motherboards, because of how much PCIe lanes that they have available in 2023/2024, I would consider $700 okay. Like that's an okay price for a Threadripper motherboard. Like, that's doable. That's acceptable. What's not acceptable is, like, $1,300 MSI godlike pricing. That's where it becomes unobtainable. But, like, $700, you know, that's fine. But, like, $1,400, like, double $700? No, that's where, like, let's put it this way. If the motherboard costs more money than an RTX 4080 or a 7900 XTX, then it becomes questionable. Because I don't know if I can even justify that kind of upgrade. You know, like, even though the multi-thread performance is going to be more than anything I've ever experienced ever, I just don't know if I can afford, like, because the whole total platform, right? Like RDIMM requirements and that kind of stuff. RDIMM is not cheap. The coolers are not cheap either. Although, like, I don't know, because there's like these weird, like, I've seen this from Noctua. And this is supposed to be for Threadripper WTRX5. Like, this is the new one? Like, this thing works on the new Threadripper? But it doesn't look... To me, this doesn't look adequate. Because it's a single stack skyscraper. It's not a dual stack. You have a feeling they will price them in such a way where it will only be attractive to firms, companies that can afford more than one system for bulk price. For the Threadripper Pro, yeah. Definitely. For Threadripper Pro. But for Threadripper DIY, like, I don't see why they would do that. You know what I'm saying? Like Threadripper, the regular one, historically, the whole point of Threadripper was to address that market between mainstream and workstation. And that's what is known as high-end desktop, or HEDT. So I don't really see it being priced in a way where you would want bulk price. Bulk price is going to be for the professional, the Threadripper Pro. That's the bulk price one, where firms are going to buy, you know, like a dozen of them for their CAD designers or their architects or whoever is going to use those for their job. But for everyone else, I think the standard Threadripper, I don't really see why. Because think about it, like, if you're a company, if you need the IT telemetry security that the Pro offers, like, you wouldn't buy the regular Threadripper. It doesn't make any sense, right? So it's not going to have the same core count. It's not going to support the same number of PCIe lanes. You might as well just buy the workstation. Like, if you're a corporation or you're even a small company, you know, maybe. I mean, maybe there's some outliers. Like, the best one I can think of is like Linus Media Group. Like, Linus, he would definitely consider like going to this new Threadripper, not Threadripper Pro. I mean, he would consider that too, I guess, for some of the workstations, probably like one or two of them, for like the main editors, for the ones that do like all the big, like the high priority videos, maybe. But even then, it's like, does that really make it much of a difference for their workflow? I don't know. I don't think so. So yeah, there's always outliers though. Like smaller companies, there may be a situation where they can get the regular Threadripper, but I don't think you're going to get bulk pricing for the regular one because you're not going to move enough systems to justify it. Yeah, see, this doesn't even look... Okay, this is a dual stack, but why does it look so small? 92mm fan? I don't know. There's a giant, like... There's a giant heat spreader there, but I don't know. That's, to me... Threadripper. No, these are all the old ones. WRX 80. No, I'm looking for TRX 50. But see, okay, look at this price. Look at how much this Asus motherboard is. This is last generation Threadripper. This is Threadripper 5000. This is the Threadripper Pro. This is already $1,000. And this was always $1,000. That's what I'm telling you. Like a $700 motherboard price is acceptable because I already know that the workstation boards already go for like $1,000. So, yeah, it's crazy. But this is one of those systems that if you buy this, you're not going to be changing the system out like every year. No way. Like, this is one of those, like, long-term, you know... I mean, how many years did I use Threadripper? 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22. See, I used about 5 years. I had Threadripper for 5 years. The 2950X. So this is like a 5-year PC in terms of how long you'll end up using it. And to me, like, as an enthusiast, somebody who typically... would upgrade the mainstream every 2 years. The PC, for me, the PC CPU upgrade is about every 2 years. But if I'm doing Threadripper, that's like, you know, 4 years. That's like, it's twice as long. Because you're paying so much more, but it basically means that you basically skip, you know, like other generations. So in that regard, that kind of justifies how AMD sort of killed off the previous Threadripper socket, or they didn't provide multiple generations of CPUs in the previous socket, because they did like the 1950X and the 2950X, those were in the same socket, but then the 3000 series Threadripper had its own socket, and then the 5000 series had a different socket. And now they're moving to another socket with this 7000 series. So I feel like it's more justifiable to do that, or to get away with only one CPU per socket, because the idea is you're not going to be changing the machine that often. Would it be nice to get a drop-in socket upgrade? Yes, of course. But is it really something that is going to be necessary? I don't know. When the core counts are already that high, you know, Definitely seems like a 3-year minimum lifespan is achievable, and that's pretty much the lifespan of a socket, of a typical like Intel socket. I know AM4 lasted a really long time, you know, like 5 years, and AM5 will probably have a similar lifespan. So AM5 is what, 1 year old already, and so it's gonna be like 2 in 2024, and then 3 in 2025. So yeah, probably 2026 is when that socket gets retired. So about 4 years, if I had to guess. Or they'll introduce the new one 4 years, and then they'll phase out that one off the 5th year. So 5 years. Yeah, I don't see any of these. TRX 50. Yeah, the only thing these Noctua coolers show up, which is really interesting. I don't see anything else except the Noctua coolers. Well, anyway, that's Threadripper. Yeah, that's. I didn't really have many more articles here to go through. Let's see, did I talk about all this stuff? Oh, gaming news. What was I going to talk about? Gaming. Let's see. Alan Wake 2 performance benchmark review. We can look at this. 30 GPUs were tested. So if we look at VRAM usage in this title, you can see it uses a lot. Oh, it uses a lot, especially at 4K with maximum path tracing. So this game is probably the newest. This is the most advanced game in terms of what it offers, because it offers path tracing, it offers ray tracing, it offers none of the above, it offers all of the above, and you can kind of see the results with frame generation as well. So it looks like standard maximum settings with no ray tracing, that's going to be blue. For 1080p, it uses more than 10 gigabytes. Strangely enough, going from 1080 to 1440 only increases the VRAM usage by 1 gigabyte. And then going from 1440 to 2160, it goes up by another about almost 2 more gigabytes to 12.7, 12.8. But when you turn on ray tracing, that's when the VRAM starts going crazy. Because maximum settings with RT, this game at 1080p uses more than 12 gigabytes of video memory. Think about that. We just had the whole, like, the public complaining about 8 gigabytes not being enough. Now 12 gigabytes is not enough at 1080p. Max RT, max RT, max settings. You need 12.2 gigs of VRAM for 1080p. 1080p. Could it be a case where they have the higher resolution loaded in memory, but downscaling it to 1080p? No, I don't think so. No. They shouldn't do that. That wouldn't make sense. Why would you do downscaling if you're supposed to be running native resolution? Because we're not talking about upscaling, and downscaling wouldn't make any sense. That just adds unnecessary computation if you're going to do a downscaling filter. That's kind of weird. So I doubt it. This game is just insane in terms of the requirements, though. So if we turn on path tracing is the true ray tracing. That's going to be the purple. Now, the VRAM didn't change that much. It's like everything uses additional, anywhere from like 200 to, well, at 4K, it uses like another gigabyte, essentially. But 4K is kind of scary because with ray tracing, 4K is approaching 16 gigabytes. So look at that. At 4K, the 4080 is nearing its maximum VRAM. In fact, at 2160p with full path tracing, The amount of VRAM at 4K native goes up to 16.4 gigabytes of VRAM. That means there's only like 4 graphics cards that I know of that can handle the amount of VRAM requirements. Those 4 graphics cards being the 4090 and the 7900 XTX, because they both have 24 gigabytes. Then you have the 7900 XT at 20 gigabytes. And then the only other graphics card would be the RTX 3090. Well, I guess the 3090 Ti as well with 24 gigabytes. So the last big Ampere die also has enough VRAM. But other than those, like nothing else has enough. And then if we go really crazy with frame generation, then it's using almost 18s at 4K maximum with path tracing. So that's a lot. Like, that's a lot of VRAM. So, I don't know what this means, like, for the future of trying to do path tracing in games. Because if the VRAM requirements for path tracing is this insane, then it's almost like what does it mean? Right? Like, what does it mean for computer hardware? For, like, general purpose GPU, like, for GPUs? If you have to have so much VRAM just to run path tracing. Because what makes this crazy is when you turn on RT and then you turn it into path tracing, the VRAM goes way up. Because look at the difference. Look at the difference between the blue and the orange, or the brown, or whatever, gold, or whatever this color is. 12.7 at 4K, no path tracing or no RT. Then you turn RT and it goes to almost 16. Then with path tracing, it's over 16. That means it's doing like, what is that? 3.5 gigabytes of video memory just for the path tracing. The XTX is unplayable, 1440. We haven't looked at the results yet. The 4K VRAM usage is meaningless though, since the 4090 can't do 1440 60. But see, the thing is, it's not that it's meaningless. It kind of shows what sort of hardware would be required to tackle this game at that extreme resolution, at 4K resolution. This is the reason why, like, 8K is such a meme and so pointless to talk about. Because, see, I talk about 4K, but, you know, like, the consoles and Nvidia and then AMD in the last launch talk about 8K gaming. Oh, gaming at 8K, you know, like, that is such a... It's such a waste of marketing. Like, why even bring that up when, you know, like, if this is what is required for 4K, like, clearly 8K is a pipe dream at this point. Even if you have the VRAM, the core GPU is a limiting factor. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, not only is the core not enough for this type of game, but the VRAM requirements is so high that the average mainstream, you know, 8 gigabyte to 12 gigabyte, maybe 16 gigabyte range of VRAM, that's not even really going to cut it long term. So that is the reason why, like, when I did that review on the 7800 XT, I didn't even bother testing 4K because there's no reason to. Like, I don't consider that card a 4K graphics card, and looking at these results kind of prove that. You know, because that card had 16 gigabytes of VRAM at $500. I mean, that's a decent price for that card. I mean, that's actually a pretty good price compared to everything else, all things considered. But the fact that you have 4K exceeding 16 gigabytes with path tracing shows that, you know, you got to have more than 16 gigabytes if you're talking about a serious contender for playing at 4K. So, what I want to know, though, is what happens. So, here are the results. What I want to know, though, is what happens when you turn the graphics down to medium, but keep the path tracing turned on. Like, I don't think they tested that. So let's look at the results here. So rasterization only. In 1080p, the 4090 manages 150 frames per second. The XTX manages about 129, and the 4080 does 122, and the XT does 116, and the 3090 Ti does 107. So at 1080p, I mean, it looks very playable for a lot of these overpriced GPUs for that resolution. So what I would consider realistically for 1080p, I would remove all of these results and I would only start around, I mean, I don't even really feel like the 6800 XT would be what I consider. Like if somebody bought a 6800 XT for 1080p back in 2020 or whenever they got this thing, unless they bought it this year at a discounted price, I mean, I guess. But realistically, like I would start the list for 1080 like right here, because this is, in my mind, this is what I consider the 1080p market. So basically, you know, 7700 XT does 77, and then 3070 Ti does 73. So it's kind of in line with what you'd expect. The mighty 2080 Ti is almost 60 frames per second in this title at 1080p. So, and a lot of people like to say the 2080 Ti was the world's first 4K graphics card. It hasn't aged well. Let's just leave it at that. As the world's first 4K graphics card, it's doing almost 60 FPS at 1080p in this game. Now, granted, this game is really hard to run, and that graphics card is pretty old by today's standards. So I'll give it that. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt there. But, you know, it's not a 4K graphics card. And this is kind of telling in terms of what will happen to the 4090 and the XTX as time goes by. As the years go by, these graphics cards that are doing like, you know, 130 to 150, or I guess we'll go from like 100 or so to 150, they're going to also age pretty poorly, I would say. Just looking at how the 2080 Ti did. So, yeah, that's unfortunate. Intel Arc is doing 45. So Intel's managing to do about 45 on the A770 in this title. So, it's basically tying with a 3060. So, that's interesting to see. Because, you know, when Intel launched the A770 last year, you know, about 13 months ago, back in October of 2022, all their marketing compared against 3060 and how it was like compared with 3060. Well, it's hanging in there. It's competitive with 3060. I'll give it that. You know, it's right next to the 6600 XT and the 3060. So it's a year old now. And remember what I said earlier this year? I said that the A770, the problem with the A770 is it came out so late that it will end up, it'll be forced into comparisons against the next generation hardware. So if we were to imagine that 3060 and 6600 didn't exist, the proper comparison would be 7600, which is faster, and the 4060. Both of those are a little bit faster than Intel's GPU. Now, they're not a whole lot faster, but remember, these two GPUs are so gimped, they're so cut down and weak in terms of their bus width versus the Intel GPU. So in that, when you look at it that way, it's kind of embarrassing for the Intel GPU. They don't want to make something look like 1080 Ti again. Well, 1080 Ti, about that. That GPU does not do well on this game at all. Like, unfortunately, Pascal, the sun has set. Let's say this about Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 was the final nail in the coffin for the 1080 Ti. That GPU is finally dead because this one game just so happened to make use of mesh shaders. It uses mesh shaders. And you know what is the Achilles heel of the GTX 1080 Ti? It can't do mesh shaders. Or it doesn't have any way to accelerate mesh shading. So what ends up happening is the 1080 Ti, basically, it's, imagine like you have to color in with colored pencils or crayons. You had to color a shape. You had to color a shape. Now, if you're the 1080 Ti, you basically have one finger to hold the crayon, and it's like the 1080 Ti is malformed. It has a malformed hand, and it has to use like one finger to figure out how to hold the crayon, and then like shade in that shape, color that shape with one finger. Versus all the other GPUs that have mesh shaders, they get the whole hand. They get all 5 fingers. The 2080 Ti, all those AMD cards, they all, and the Intel, I guess the Intel also, they have the full 5 fingers to pick up that crayon and shade that thing as fast as possible. Versus 1080 Ti has like literally one finger to color in the thing as fast as it can. So basically, what does it do? It does worse than the 5700 XT in this game. I'll say that again. The 1080 Ti is slower than the 5700 XT in Alan Wake 2. It's like 15 frames per second in this game. So, oh, how the mighty have fallen. So, it's unfortunate, but, you know, like, Pascal's old, so it has to go at some point. Now, what's funny is the 5700 XT, that GPU doesn't have mesh shaders either. So there's something about the AMD card being able to kind of brute force its way up to 25.5 frames. You can see it right there. It's doing 25.5 without mesh shaders. So it's somehow managing to try to keep up with 1660 Ti despite not having any mesh shaders. Whereas 1660 Ti does have mesh shaders because it is Turing based. So that's kind of interesting, I guess. But if you look at the difference between 5700 XT and 6700 XT, there's a massive difference. That's the difference of mesh shaders right there. 5700 XT has better FP16 compute. Okay, maybe that's why. Maybe it's the FP16 that allows it to brute force its way up onto the chart. Because the 1080 Ti, it couldn't even make it onto the chart. Like, that's how bad it was. And that's sad, considering I still have like 2 1080s for SLI, and now that I know that this game exists, it's like, yeah, those two GPUs are basically gonna sit on the shelf for the rest of their life. Alright, 1440p. Man, this game is hard to run. So 1440p, I consider 1440p to start around 4080, I guess, just because of the VRAM. So where I consider like the real 1440p in terms of the value, these are what I consider the value cards for 1440p. And this is telling because without any ray tracing, at maximum settings, rasterization only, the 4070 and the 7800 XT are only just above 60 frames per second. They're both at around 62, 63 frames per second. So, and the previous flagship from AMD, the 6900 XT, is only doing about 60, 61 and 62 if you round that up. So, surprisingly, there's not that much of a gap between the 6900 XT and the 6800 XT. They seem like a little bit closer than I would expect them to be. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. And then where's the 30? Is the 3080 doing pretty good? Okay, the 3080 actually is doing pretty good in this game relative to the other cards. So it's doing 65 frames per second on the 3080. So it's beating a 4070, which typically these two cards, it's not beating it by a lot, but it is winning. It is a technical win for the 3080 over the 4070. It's also a win over the 6800 XT. That card is sub 60 at 1440p. So the Nvidia cards are definitely performing better in this title. You can see, like, well, I mean, for the most part, they're performing better. Like, if we compare, like, price to price, so the XTX to distinguish the difference side by side between those two, and then you have the 7900 XT. I've always said that this GPU, the second fastest RDNA 3, is about the same as a 3090 Ti. And again, here, these two GPUs are very close, and the 4070 Ti is doing pretty good considering how cut down that GPU is. It is actually quite surprising to see the 4070 Ti performing as well as it is. It's losing to those other two cards, but it's still close to them. It's relatively close to them. And it is beating NVIDIA's 3090, which offers a lot more brute force hardware compared to the 4070 Ti. So that shows you that the Ada architecture does have some significant improvements versus Ampere. This tells me that this game is scaling with memory bandwidth over raw shading unit count. Is it though? How does the 4070 Ti's memory bandwidth compare to the 3090? Because it's winning against the 3090 by a decent amount. We're talking like 73 versus 78. So it's roughly 5 frames per second faster than the 3090. So if you round that to 78 versus 81, it's only 3 FPS slower than the 3090 Ti. It has less, but the L2 cache is making up for it. Oh. Okay. So the cache is making up for it. I don't know how much cache it has. Also much higher GPU core clock. Is it really that much faster though? Like what's the speed of the 3090 Ti? 3090 Ti runs at around 1860 megahertz. $4070 Ti runs. Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's a lot. That's like 800 megahertz faster, roughly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's faster. That's a lot faster, actually. So how does that compare then to this one from AMD? So the 7900 XT runs at around 2400 megahertz, 2394. So about 2400. So this runs at a slower speed than the 4070 Ti, but this has like a much wider bus width. So I'm not sure what the deal is, because this isn't doing that much faster. I mean, okay, 83 versus 78. You know, like that's 5 frames faster than the 4070 Ti. You would expect the AMD card to be even faster if you compare like the bus width, but you're saying like the L2 cache. So I can kind of get behind that idea, like the L2 is helping out. And then Intel, the A750 is now falling below 30 frames per second. But the A770 is hanging on. It's at 34. I feel like once you fall below the 30 FPS mark, you basically fail. So like these 5 GPUs down here, starting with the 6600 XT, they're all failures in my mind. Like they failed to make 29.5. That's like depending on how you grade that, you can round that up or round that down. You know, like 25 and 29 and a half is technically, you round it up to 30. So maybe this one like passes on a technicality, but these other ones definitely fail. It's kind of sad seeing the A750 like dropping close to a 3050. That's sad to see. If you compare the 3090 L2 versus the oh, we'll see. Does it show the cache? Wait, where is it? Oh. 3090 with this. Does it say how much cache they have? Oh, 48 megabytes. 48 megabytes for the 4070 Ti, and the 3090 has... Oh, wow, you're right. Yeah, 6 megabytes? This has 6 megabytes. This has 48... Oh, wow. Okay, so how much does the AMD card have? Do they even... Oh, wait. Oh. Wait, the AMD cards have an L3 cache. They have like an 80 megabyte L3 cache. I have to go back. It's been so long since I've looked at the architecture of these GPUs that I've forgotten how they're different from like... I forgot, besides the fact that the RDNA 3 uses the like the chiplets thing, like the MCDs and the GCD, I've forgotten how they're different from the previous generation. So I like, okay, so that's got like 6. This also has 6. So what's interesting is 3090 and 7900 XT have the same. Does 3090 Ti have the same? Okay, see 3090 Ti has the same L2 as the 7900 XT. I don't even know if AMD's L2 scales. Like, it's still 6. So AMD's just stacking on more L3. So that's very interesting. Okay, so that's some of the architecture differences. I've never actually thought about looking at the cache numbers on the GPUs, like the L2. So that's interesting. Okay. Okay, and then 4K. 4K, there is only one graphics card out of all of them that can manage to average above 60 frames per second, and that is the 4090. So this game makes the 4090 look like it's the only true 4K graphics card, and everything else is underpowered or underperforming in this title by a lot. So like 4080 and the XTX both fail to stay above 60. Everything else is even worse. And then now our 30 FPS line minimum moves all the way up to the 6800 XT. And then all these cards down here, including the new 7700 XT, fall off and fail the test. So, yeah. But anyway, that's fine, because those are not 4K cards anyway. It is kind of disappointing, though, to see 4080 and XTX fail. Because in my mind, like, it's kind of weird that the $1,000 price point can't reliably give you a 4K 60 experience. Now, granted, this is what, ultra preset, no RT. So, like, there's probably like one setting. It's probably like the shaders or something. You crank it down to very high or whatever, like one setting down, and then that moves those two GPUs above 60. That's typically how it is. Or you change the ambient occlusion setting or something, and then or volumetric. It's usually volumetric. You either toggle volumetric down 1 from the max, or you change the shaders down from 1 from the max, and then all of a sudden, like a GPU that was doing like 55 is all of a sudden doing like 64 or something like that. So it's unfortunate though you can't just do like max settings. So only the 4090 can do max settings in this title at 4K. So, and that's how it should be. Well, I'm not saying that's how it should be, but this is what I would look at. Like, when I look at this, like, I don't care that the 4090 does 116 at 1440, because I don't consider this a 1440p card. So like what I would look for is how does these cards do? And these cards are only doing 63, which is okay. That's acceptable. But, you know, like these cards are 1440p cards and they're doing about 63 frames per second. This card is a 4K card and it's doing 71 frames per second. So this actually makes the this actually makes the 4090 look better than the 1440p cards in my mind. So that's kind of weird. 48 megabytes of L2. Oh yeah. You were struggling to run 1440p max on the 4090 and the 7800X 3D. Wait, really? Oh, with path tracing. Okay, yeah. Yeah, let's look at the path tracing numbers. So this is, oh, there's minimums. We don't care. Let's do, okay, ray tracing. 1080p. With ray tracing, what's the menu setting for that? Does it literally say path tracing? How do you know it's doing path tracing versus ray tracing? Is there a toggle that says RT and there's one that says PT? Or how does that work? Because it shows here ray tracing at 1080p. Ray tracing. Oh man, this is brutal. This is so brutal. All right, so let's look at our 1080p cards. 1080p cards start around 4060 Ti, I guess. This is what I consider 1080p. So 1080p, nothing is doing 1080p at acceptable frame rates in RT. And that's kind of the reason why, like, I don't really care much about ray tracing. Because a typical 1080p card can't do RT at a playable, or like at an optimal experience, i.e. 60 FPS. Like, what's the point, you know? Okay, 1440p. Now, let's look at our 1440p. So I guess we'll start at, yeah, we'll start at well, I mean, 4070 Ti is there, but it's doing 50. The AMD cards are doing pretty bad, but that's to be expected with this RT implementation being so hard to run. And then we've got, yeah, basically, like, everything's failing. Literally everything's failing. If a 4K GPU is the only GPU that can do RT at 1440p above 60. Oh, now, okay, 4080's doing it. 61. So, okay, so the 4080's managing to do it. A $1,200 GPU for 1440p is doing 61 with RT. I don't know, man. That doesn't look good. All right, anyway. And here we go. 4K. This is it. 4K. The 4090 at 4K with ray tracing is doing 44.6 frames per second. The 4080 does 33. So if we look at, if we take 30 FPS console experience to be the minimum threshold, the 4080 and the 4090 are the only two GPUs that pass the test. Everything else fails the test. The previous flagship 3090 Ti fails the test. Now, here's what's kind of funny. What is going on here? Okay, look at this. I was wondering, where was this GPU? 4070 Ti does 4 frames per second in this game at 4K with ray tracing turned on. 4070 Ti does 4 frames per second. So 1440p, it was able to do it. So basically, all the GPUs that have 8 gigabytes fail. Well, yeah, they all fail. They all run out of VRAM, so they basically fail the test. At 1440. Now at 4K, all the GPUs that have, except, well, the 6700 for some reason. Well, actually, I guess from, yeah, all the, well, this is 12, but it's, I'm not sure what's going on here. The 6700 XT is somehow, like, twice as fast as the 4070 in this game, and they both have 12 gigs. The A770 is faster. Hey, the A770 technically wins against its intended rival in this title. The A770 is faster than a 6700 XT. Not only is it faster than a 6700 XT, it's faster than a $600 4070. And get this, it's faster than an $850 4070 Ti. That's the true victory. This is the true victory. This is what I wanted to see from Intel. I wanted to see Intel win in a way that actually has meaning. This actually has meaning. Now, I'm not sure how the 6700 XT is managing to almost keep up, even though it has 12 gigs, even though every other 12 gigabyte card fails. Somehow, the 6700 XT is able to, like, somehow, like, keep up. I don't know how. I don't know what it's doing, but it's somehow able to keep up. That's hilarious. Everything else is kind of, like, fails so hard. like, it's funny. Even despite all of this, the ranking hierarchy for the Ampere GPUs still align. like at the end of the day, the 3050 is still at the bottom of the Ampere stack, regardless of how they all failed. Because what's funny is the 4070 Ti actually did worse than the 4070 non-Ti at 4K resolution. That's hilarious. But the Ampere ones are all okay. The 3080 actually, oh no, that tied. It tied the 37. Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's RT. Now let's look at the path tracing. Okay, path tracing. This is, wait, so what was our 1080p again for the 108? Okay, 108, and now we drop to 86 for 1080p path tracing. So, and then 4080 is doing 67 to 68, and then everything else is below 60 essentially. Yeah, and then you got like a bunch of AMD cards all like stacked up in the middle here, and then like between the 4060 Ti and the 2080 Ti, and then you have ARC already starting out at like 18, and 3050 is dying like at the very beginning. The 3050 basically had a heart attack with the ray tracing, and it's like something's wrong with it. So the GPU needs to be RMA'd at this point. It's already starting out at like 3.7. So now 1440p path tracing, 4090 is now just touching 60 frames per second at 1440p path tracing. So yeah, I guess the moral of the story, and if we look at the 4K, like all this stuff, okay, again, all this stuff fails. And then, yeah, well, on the bright side, I will say this, on a positive note, the 4090 at 4K native path tracing is able to achieve above 30 frames per second. It is able to achieve the visual quality that path tracing provides while also giving you the 8th generation, aka PS4, Xbox One, 30 FPS gaming experience. It's able to give you that 30 FPS cinematic console experience with all the visuals that path tracing offers. So that is something worth mentioning, because it refuses to go down. It refuses to bend the knee to Alan Wake 2 and go sub 30 FPS. It refuses to go below 30 FPS. It fights on and stays above 30 FPS. So that is pretty admirable. So I will point that out. Everything else is a complete fail, and they all fail. All the AMD cards fail. It clearly shows that to do path tracing, you really need, at least with the way games are designed today, you really need dedicated hardware to accelerate this. But we're not there for 4K, because if that's all you're able to do is 32 FPS, I mean, yeah, you can do 32 FPS on a 4090 with full path tracing, which is actually pretty impressive when you think about it. But if you go back here to 1440, 60 frames per second, 1440p path tracing. So when you see results like this, for people who are really enthusiastic about path tracing and ray tracing, 1440p is kind of where it's at. So it makes sense to me why, like, when I see these results, it makes sense to see why somebody would go and buy a 4090 and pair it up with a 1440p monitor, because they're interested in the path tracing technology and how it, like, kind of makes the game improve from a visual standpoint. That makes sense to me. But in general, I stand by my original opinion that, based off of price points, product segmentation, and like where a graphics card is supposed to sit in the market, it does have a target resolution. And I still believe that the 4090 is a 4K. It's intended to be a 4K product. Now, clearly, the technology for path tracing, the hardware to achieve path tracing, is not there today. It's not there. Because if you look at what is an actual 1440p graphics card, you know, it's debatable that if the 4070 Ti, I will include the 4070 Ti as a 1440p graphics card, because it's obviously not a 4K graphics card. I mean, and technically, I guess somebody could include the 4080, but the more people include these GPUs, then that kind of drags in all of AMD's upper tier cards to be 1440p cards as well. And you can see, like, nothing here, except for possibly the 4080, gives a good result at 1440p. Nothing. Like, all of AMD's cards fail. They're all sub 30. The only Ampere cards that are above 30 are the really expensive 24GB 3090 and 3090 Ti. Basically cards that no one really wants on the used market, especially the 3090, because the 3090's VRAM on the backside cooks itself, heats up, and all the hot and cold cycling of the VRAM eventually will cause the 3090 to start artifacting as it gets older. This is a known fact. So if you have a 3090, I'm sorry, because your card will eventually start artifacting after a certain number of months, or however hard you push the card or whatever. Eventually the VRAM on the back is going to start failing due to the hot and cold cycles. It basically cooks itself at like 100 degrees Celsius over a long period of time, or it depends on how hard you push the card. But in general, the 3090 is not going to have good resale value for that reason. Now, the 3090 Ti, it fares much better, but it's so power hungry. And, I mean, the card literally pulls easily 500 watts. Like, even the Founders Edition that I have does 450 minimum. It's realistically, the 3090 Ti FE that I have pulls about 470 watts is kind of the average. So it uses so much power, and this is the result that it does. It's like, okay, it's above 30 at 1440p, but at that power consumption, it's straight up embarrassing. So 4080, you know, okay, 45, yeah, it's doing that 45. It's like halfway between 30 and halfway between 60. So it's got that going for it. So it's going to be a lot smoother looking compared to these other ones. But, you know, it's 16 gigabytes. It's not the 8102. It's, you know, like, there's a lot of negative things surrounding this card. So it's just kind of meh. And then you've got AMD, and they don't have the hardware to do the RT separately. They're doing the shaders. They're doing the best they can. These are the results. Take it or leave it, whatever. I mean, you know, that's just kind of the limitation there. And then Intel, 11 FPS. You know, that 11 number with Intel never really sits right with a lot of people, because 11th gen Rocket Lake caused a lot of PTSD in the Intel camp back in the day. So, that's not really good. That's a bad omen for the A770. And then you've got like all these failures over here, like all these 8 gigabyte trash. And then here you've got like 12 gigabytes all failing across the board. And yeah, everything basically fails. That's why you play at 1440. No, I understand. I understand why you play at 1440 because you like path tracing and ray tracing. But in general, the GPU, you basically, if you like path tracing, the conclusion from these results is that if you're somebody who values path tracing as a technology, as a feature for games, you're kind of forced to step up to a whole nother tier of GPU just to be able to get playable experiences in the game. That's what I'm concluding from this. You have to buy a GPU that was designed for 4K resolution in terms of rasterization so that you can play the game with path tracing enabled. So, I mean, that's what these results show right here, which is unfortunate because, if you try to tell the average person, like you got to spend like anywhere from $1,600 to $2,000 on a GPU if you want to do path tracing at 1440p, like a lot of people are probably going to look at you kind of weird. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just really like that kind of money for that resolution. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like if you tell people like, $1,600 to $2,000 for a GPU, they're like, okay, well, it better be paired up with a 4K monitor. Because if you're going to go all out on the GPU, you need to go all out on the monitor, etc., etc. So that's why these things are kind of priced the way they are. So let's see what happens with DLSS and FSR. So I guess these technologies, upscalers, are the saving grace. Now, and the thing is, you guys know I play my games at 4K resolution. When possible, I try to do 4K native. But because of all these super challenging games that have come out this year, and when I say challenging, I'm talking about they're so hard to run at native 4K, I have been forced to embrace upscaling technology like DLSS and FSR in order to have a playable experience at 4K. So now, thankfully, FSR and DLSS are viable solutions at 4K because you're taking 1440p. Now we're talking about FSR quality or DLSS quality, which is basically 1440p upscaled to 4K. Now you're taking a relatively high resolution, which is 1440p, and then you're upscaling that using those algorithms to get to 4K. So in my case, using FSR or DLSS to go to 4K from 1440 is actually not that bad. It's actually not that bad. So, but if you're somebody who needs to rely on these sort of upscalers to get a playable experience at 1080p, or maybe even 1440p, but typically 1080p is where the problems show up, you have to upscale from like 720p or some intermediate resolution to 1080p. That's where you don't get that good of a result because the image is starting at a very low resolution. There's not enough data in the overall frame to get a good looking output. That's the problem with having to use DLSS and FSR at lower resolutions because your input, your internal render resolution is so low, it's just not going to give you a good result. Versus someone like me or anyone who's going to be playing at 4K, if we're upscaling from 1440 to 4K, it actually doesn't look that bad because 1440 already was a pretty crisp, sharp looking resolution to start with. So that's why it's not that bad. But then frame generation, obviously, like that's kind of the next level. So if we look at 1080p, I wish they would have shown like, I get why they do this, but I would have liked to have seen some other graphics card other than the 4090 for the 1080p results, because this is kind of like, okay, you can do ultra performance on a 4090 and get 193 FPS. I can guarantee you nobody is going to play Alan Wake 2 on DLSS ultra performance. That's going to look terrible at 1080p. So these are kind of stupid results in my opinion. These are kind of a waste of time in terms of looking. I mean, it's nice to see it. It's like cool hypothetical info, but it's not very useful, because I feel like if somebody needs to use DLSS to get a playable experience at 1080p, it would be far more valuable to see results from something like a 4060. So that's kind of a missed opportunity. And then for 1440p, I would have liked to see either the 4070's results or the 4070 Ti. And then for 4K, this is fine. So 4090 at 4K, this is totally okay. So they're showing that with native 4K DLAA, no ray tracing, it's doing 71, and then it can scale all the way. Now, typically, you would only really choose quality. That's the only one I would select. I would never use balanced performance or ultra performance. It's only going to be quality, because quality is basically 1440p up to 4K. So the 99 FPS, that's a good result. And then if you want to do frame generation, it basically doubles the frames. Similarly with AMD, I would have liked to have seen other results, but here's where this one comes in handy. See, this is the reason why, like, in my case, gaming on an XTX at 4K, it's pretty much doable, because I'm just going to turn, if I can't do 60 native, I'm just going to turn on quality, and it looks fine. 81 FPS. So and if I'm on the 4090, then we're doing, 99, 81. So yeah, like the Nvidia card is doing about 20 frames per second faster almost. So at that resolution. And then ray tracing, we want to look at the 4K. I'm just going to skip these other ones. So 4K, 45 FPS, you turn on quality, bam. See what I mean? You're at 67 FPS. 67 FPS with DLSS quality, and that isn't even with frame gen. You turn frame gen on, then you get even more. So why would they do ultra plus frame gen? That's, I guess, like, this is stupid. I want to see like quality plus frame gen. I don't want to see ultra performance. Who wants to play at ultra performance? That's gonna look so bad. All right, anyway, and then AMD's one. So obviously this game doesn't have FSR3 because they're not showing any frame generation results. But here with ray tracing, so AMD cannot do like RT in this game. Like for me, if I'm gonna play Alan Wake 2 on the AMD card, I'm not even gonna use ray tracing. Like if it has to go to ultra performance for 4K, forget it. It's not even worth bothering with. So it's like, in my case, the options are DLSS quality plus the frame generation, or just frame generation. I would like to see the frame generation without the DLSS preset at all. I just kind of want to see what that would be, because that's probably how I would actually play the game. I'd probably do DLAA plus frame generation, and that's probably how I would play the game on the Nvidia card. I wouldn't even use DLSS 2 preset technologies. And then for AMD, I would just play the game without ray tracing. Like I would just, so my results would be like 81. And then for path tracing, the options are okay. So the 4090 does, you just turn on DLSS quality and it already does 63. That's really good. But I would like to see what DLAA plus frame generation would do. So that would be my feedback to whoever did these results. The ultra performance plus frame generation, it's a nice hypothetical, but no one is going to use ultra performance because it's going to make the image look like garbage. So, yeah. And then AMD, path tracing, just not really, it's not really there. So, Yeah. So this is a surprisingly good game. Like, I have not played Alan Wake 2. I was thinking about getting Alan Wake 2 because the game looks really good, and I don't really have any of these games besides, I guess Lords of the Fallen is a UE5 game that uses Lumen and Nanite, but that's not a game that really, I don't know. I feel like the visuals in Alan Wake 2 actually look the part. Like, Alan Wake 2 looks the way like a game that would leverage ray tracing and path tracing should look. Whereas Lords of the Fallen does use RT, but you turn it on or off and it doesn't look any different. So it's like, I don't know, it's a missed opportunity in that game. Can you try to finish Hogwarts Legacy? Yeah, I said that earlier at the beginning of the stream. So I'll be playing Hogwarts Legacy in the next few weeks here. I'll probably do 1 or 2 more like on-stream sessions with that game. And I'm also going to try to finish Forspoken as well. Those are the 2 games that I have on a list that I have where I want to finish those games by the end of the year. So we'll probably do, well, we'll see. But yeah, those are the 2 that are on the list right now. But yeah, other than that, that was pretty much all I had for this stream. Like, I guess we talked about all the main things. There's a lot of like weird stuff going on. There's a bunch of layoffs in the industry, in the gaming industry. A lot of games, I guess a lot of games failed to meet their sales targets for the year. Like Final Fantasy 16 was short a couple million, I think, in the North America region. And there was like a bunch of other games that failed to hit their targets. I think like Jedi Survivor didn't sell as well as it was supposed to. That was an EA published game. Yeah, there's a bunch of layoffs happening in the video game industry. It's not good. It only means that companies are going to want to sell you more live service games, like loot box type games and mobile games and gacha games and that kind of stuff, because those are kind of like the easy money. So it's kind of disappointing. But that's pretty much all I had for this stream. So, okay, guys. Well, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. We'll probably do, I'm trying to think, the next, I am working on some videos for, like, people that were asking me about OBS last time, and I am testing the new AverMedia Live Gamer 2.1. So I'm probably going to do, like, a video or 2 on this thing, comparing it with the Live Gamer Bolt, which is a Thunderbolt 3 based external capture card. These are 2 external capture cards that I have on hand. This one is in for testing. So we're going to do some content on that. So it's going to be more like content creator centric videos. I know I haven't put a video up in a while. I've just been busy with other stuff. But yeah. So stay tuned for that if you're interested, because I know there were people that were in last stream here asking a lot of questions about like how to stream, how to do OBS, or how to set it up to do like the game plus the whatever, the like the settings for how to do AV1. That was another question. So I'm going to do a video on that. If you're interested in that, stay tuned. Get subscribed to the channel. It does motivate me to keep making videos because I haven't made any videos in a while. It's been like 2 weeks since the last video. But I have been doing the live streams. Live streams aren't going anywhere. So I hope you guys enjoy the content, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.